My name is Lily. I am 36 years old, and until very recently, I thought I knew everything there was to know about my family. My mother, Margaret, was the anchor of my world, quiet, strong, always composed. She passed away 3 months ago after a long battle with cancer, and I thought I was ready to let go. But grief has a strange way of reshaping reality, making every memory sharper and every silence heavier. After her funeral, I found myself in her old house, the one I grew up in. The room still smelled faintly of her perfume, a soft lavender that clung to the curtains and the furniture. The hallway creaked the same way it did when I was a child sneaking out of bed. I thought I came only to gather her belongings, to decide what to keep and what to donate. Instead, that house became the stage where my entire life would begin to unravel. The attic was where I started. My mother rarely let me go up there when I was little. She always said it was too dusty, too dangerous, filled with boxes that could topple over. As an adult, I assumed she just didn't want me messing around in her storage. But as I climbed the wooden stairs, my flashlight cutting through the shadows, I felt an odd sense of unease, as if I were intruding into a place I was never meant to see. Dust covered everything, old trunks, broken furniture, boxes stacked higher than my shoulders. I began opening them one by one. Family photo albums, my father's army medals, holiday decorations wrapped in newspaper from decades ago. It was strangely comforting, until I found a small wooden chest tucked away in the corner, hidden beneath a stack of yellowed blankets. The chest was simple, scratched at the edges, the kind of thing you might overlook, but something about it drew me closer. When I brushed the dust away, I noticed it was tied shut with a faded blue ribbon. My heart started to race, though I couldn't explain why. Slowly, I untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside were bundles of letters, dozens of them, maybe even 100, each carefully folded and bound with twine. The envelopes were addressed in my mother's handwriting, the same handwriting that had filled my birthday cards and notes for school lunches. But these weren't written to me. The first one I opened made my entire body go cold. My dearest daughter, Elizabeth. Elizabeth? I had no sister. At least I thought I didn't. The letter went on, filled with words of regret, apologies, and promises. My mother wrote about giving Elizabeth away, about watching her grow up from a distance, about the guilt that haunted her every single day. She signed it the way she always signed things. Love always, Mom. I sat there frozen, staring at the page. My mother had another daughter. She had another life, another secret so big it shook the very foundation of everything I believed. I tore open letter after letter. Each one was the same, filled with longing, love, and shame. My mother had kept a hidden correspondence for decades, a secret relationship with a child I never knew existed. The name appeared over and over again. Elizabeth. My sister. The word felt foreign, heavy in my mind. I had grown up an only child. Lonely sometimes, but always told that was just the way it was. And yet, all along, I wasn't alone at all. Suddenly, so many things began to make sense. The hushed phone calls I sometimes overheard, the trips my mother made to visit an old friend, the way she would stare out the window with a faraway look when I asked about her past. She wasn't hiding pain from me. She was hiding someone. I pressed the letters to my chest, tears streaming down my face. Betrayal, anger, confusion, it all crashed over me at once. How could she keep this from me? Why didn't she ever tell me the truth? And most importantly, who was Elizabeth, and where was she now? In that attic, with dust swirling in the air and my mother's ghost haunting every corner, I realized my life was no longer what I thought it was. My family history had been rewritten in a single discovery, and I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I had to find her. I had to find my sister. After finding those letters, I couldn't sleep for nights. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's handwriting. Those words, my dearest daughter Elizabeth, burned into my memory. I replayed my entire childhood in my head, searching for clues I might have missed. A phone call cut short when I walked into the room. A name scribbled once in her diary that I didn't recognize. The trips she took alone, always with vague excuses. Suddenly, all of it looked different, like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known I was supposed to solve. The morning after my discovery, I spread all the letters out on my kitchen table. There were at least 50 of them, spanning more than 2 decades. The earliest was dated the year after I was born. The most recent was written only 3 months before my mother's death. I traced the faded ink with my fingers, looking for details. Most were full of emotion, apologies, confessions, endless love. But a few contained practical things, mentions of birthdays, of school milestones, of visits that might have happened in secret. One letter stopped me cold. Elizabeth, I know you're angry with me. I understand why you refused to come to the house, but I hope one day your sister will forgive me too. She doesn't know. She cannot know. Not yet. Your sister. That was me. My mother had written this nearly 10 years ago, which meant Elizabeth had always known about me. She knew she had a sister, while I lived my whole life in ignorance. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding. Why didn't she ever reach out? Why didn't she try to find me? Did she hate me? Or did she believe the same lie? That I wasn't supposed to know she existed? I decided to start with the obvious, my mother's personal belongings. I searched through her desk drawers, her filing cabinets, and her old diaries. Most of it was mundane, receipts, utility bills, to-do lists. But then I found a folder tucked deep in the back of a drawer, labeled only with the initials EW. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a birth certificate. Elizabeth Walker, born in 1983, same hospital as me, only 3 years earlier. Mother, Margaret Walker. Father, unknown. That word hit me like a punch. Unknown. Who was her father? Why had my mother hidden him? The folder also contained photographs, blurry snapshots of a young girl with dark hair and striking eyes, the same eyes I saw in my own mirror every day. She was smiling in some, scowling in others. A teenager at a birthday party, a young woman at graduation. None of the photos included me. It was as if my mother had lived 2 parallel lives, one with me, one with her, with... The strangest thing was a receipt tucked into the folder, dated just 6 months ago. It was for a small cafe downtown, signed at the bottom with the name Elizabeth W. My mother must have met her, not decades ago, not in secret, recently. The thought made my stomach twist. While I had been caring for my mother during her treatments, bringing her soup, holding her hand through her pain, she had still been seeing Elizabeth, keeping that other part of her life alive, right under my nose. I needed answers, but I didn't know where to start. The only person I could think to ask was my Aunt Carol, my mother's younger sister. She was always the one who hinted that my mother had secrets, though she never said much outright. Maybe now she would. I called her that afternoon. Her voice was warm at first, happy to hear from me, but when I mentioned Elizabeth, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Where did you hear that name?" she finally asked, her tone sharp. "I found letters," I admitted, "in Mom's attic. She had another daughter, didn't she?" Another pause. I could almost hear her weighing her words. "Lily, your mother didn't want you to know," Aunt Carol said softly. "She thought she was protecting you." "Protecting me from what?" I demanded, anger rising. "From my own sister?" "From the truth." "She had her reasons," Carol replied, her voice strained. "But yes, Elizabeth is real. She's your half-sister, and she's not someone you want in your life." Her warning only made me more determined. If Elizabeth was dangerous, if she was someone my family feared, then I needed to understand why. "Where is she?" I asked. "I can't tell you that," Aunt Carol said firmly. "It's better if you let it go. Digging into the past will only hurt you, but I couldn't let it go. Not now. Not after everything I had found." I hung up the phone, my hands shaking, my mind racing. My aunt's evasiveness told me more than she realized. Elizabeth was out there, and whatever the truth was, my family had gone to great lengths to keep it hidden. That night, I sat in the dark with the folder spread across my lap, the photos, the certificate, the letters. They were all breadcrumbs leading me to a sister I had never known. And for the first time, I understood. If I didn't find her soon, I might never get the chance. The days after my phone call with Aunt Carol felt like walking through a fog. Every corner of my life suddenly looked different, as though I were living in a house of mirrors. Nothing felt stable, nothing felt entirely true. Every memory of my mother now carried a shadow, a silent second life she had hidden. But the letters and that folder burned in my mind. Elizabeth was real. She wasn't just a name on paper, she was flesh and blood, someone who had been walking this earth for 36 years, someone who might look like me, talk like me, even think like me, and she had been kept from me deliberately. I knew I couldn't let it go, not now. So I started with the basics, the internet. I typed her full name into every search engine I could think of. Elizabeth Walker, born in 1983, hometown of Chicago. The results flooded in, hundreds of Elizabeth Walkers. Too many. Pages of LinkedIn profiles, social media accounts, business directories. It felt like looking for a single drop in an ocean. But then I remembered the cafe receipt from the folder. It was dated just 6 months ago and signed with Elizabeth W. I grabbed the receipt again and studied it closely. The cafe was a small one in downtown Chicago, a quiet corner place I had actually been to a few times myself. The timestamp showed it was paid late in the afternoon, just around the time my mother used to leave for her doctor's appointments. A knot formed in my throat. Had she been meeting Elizabeth there, right under my nose? The next morning, I drove to that cafe. It was a cold, gray day, the kind that made the streets feel lonelier than they were. Inside, the cafe smelled of roasted coffee beans and fresh pastries. I approached the counter, ordered a drink to steady my nerves, and then casually asked the barista if she remembered a woman named Elizabeth Walker. The girl frowned, tapping her fingers on the register. "We get a lot of people," she said. "What does she look like?" I hesitated. All I had were those old photos from my mother's folder, a teenager, a young woman in graduation robes, nothing recent. But I described what I imagined, a woman in her late 30s, dark hair, sharp eyes, probably with a commanding presence. The barista's face lit with recognition. "Oh yeah, I think I know who you mean. She comes in sometimes, always sits at the same corner table, orders black coffee. Doesn't talk much, kind of intense. Honestly, my heart skipped a beat." "Do you know when she was last here?" The barista shrugged. "A couple weeks ago, maybe? Hard to say, but she's a regular." That was enough for me. Elizabeth was close. Real. I wasn't chasing a ghost. I was chasing someone who still came here, who still walked these same streets. I left the cafe with a strange mix of hope and fear boiling inside me. Hope, because I was closer than ever. Fear, because I had no idea what I would find when I actually saw her. Back at home, I went through the rest of the folder again, searching for more clues. I found another receipt, this time from a bookstore just a block away from the cafe. I called the store, asking if they remembered Elizabeth Walker. At first, the clerk was dismissive, but when I mentioned she might have purchased rare history books, he paused. "Oh yeah," he said, "I know who you're talking about. She comes in now and then. Smart woman, sharp tongue, doesn't waste time on small talk. Last time she was here, she asked about a book on family law. The words hit me hard. Words hit. Why would she be looking at books about family law? Was she planning something? A legal move? A lawsuit? A claim to something that had once belonged to my mother? Suddenly, Aunt Carol's warning echoed in my head. She's not someone you want in your life. But instead of scaring me off, it only deepened my determination. If Elizabeth was dangerous, then I needed to know why. Over the next week, I went back to that cafe every single day. I sat at a table near the window, pretending to read, waiting for a glimpse of her. My nerves buzzed every time the door opened. And then, on the 4th day, she walked in. I knew it instantly. Her hair was darker than mine, cut sharp at the shoulders, her face older than the photos, but unmistakable. She carried herself with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, scanning the room like she owned it. She ordered her black coffee without hesitation, then sat at the corner table, Exactly as the barista had said. I couldn't breathe. This was her, my sister, my blood. And she was right there in front of me. For several minutes, I just sat there frozen, clutching my coffee cup as though it could keep me grounded. My pulse hammered so hard I could hear it in my ears. After weeks of sleepless nights, after poring over letters and photos, after chasing the faintest of clues, Elizabeth was real, alive, and sitting less than 10 feet away from me. I studied her carefully, trying not to be obvious. She was dressed in a tailored black coat, her nails polished, her hair smooth and deliberate. She had a presence that demanded space. Even in that small cafe, it felt as though everyone unconsciously gave her room. There was a sharpness to her, an energy that was both magnetic and intimidating. And yet, I saw pieces of myself in her. The curve of her jaw, the way her lips pursed slightly as she read the newspaper, even the way she tapped her foot absent-mindedly against the floor. It mirrored my own habits so closely that my chest tightened. This was my sister, my mother's secret, my blood. I tried to summon the courage to move. Do I walk over, introduce myself, spill the truth in one reckless confession? Or do I wait, study her from afar, try to learn more before revealing who I am? My hands trembled as I lifted my cup, my throat dry. But then she looked up. Her eyes locked with mine across the cafe, and I nearly dropped my drink. Those eyes, sharp, piercing, unflinching, were identical to my own. For a moment, I thought she recognized me instantly. My stomach lurched, my palms sweating. She narrowed her gaze as though assessing me, and then, almost imperceptibly, she smirked. It wasn't a warm smile. It was calculated, knowing. My chest constricted. She didn't know me, not exactly, but there was something in that expression that felt like she had already judged me, already placed me in some category. I couldn't sit still any longer. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and walked toward her table. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice barely steady. She glanced up again, her expression cool. "Yes?" I hesitated, my rehearsed words evaporating. "Are you Elizabeth?" Her eyes flickered with something, recognition, surprise, annoyance. But her face remained unreadable. She folded her newspaper slowly, deliberately, and set it aside. "Who's asking?" she said, her tone clipped. I swallowed hard. "My name is Lily. Lily Walker." For the first time, her composure cracked, her jaw tightened, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. "Walker?" she repeated, her voice low. I nodded. Margaret Walker was my mother. The silence between us thickened like smoke. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, her expression shifting into something colder, harder. "Well," she said finally, her voice laced with sarcasm, "so she told you." "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "She never told me." I found the letters. After she died, Elizabeth's smirk returned, sharper this time. "Of course. Margaret always loved her secrets. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised that she carried them to her grave." My heart thudded painfully. "Why? Why didn't she ever tell me about you? Why didn't you ever reach out?" Her eyes flashed with something I couldn't quite read, anger maybe, or bitterness. "Because it wasn't my choice," she snapped. "Your mother decided everything. She decided I would be hidden. She decided you'd be her perfect little angel while I was her shame. She raised you in that nice little house, gave you her name, her care, her love. And me?" She leaned forward, her voice sharp as a blade. "She gave me away." I flinched, the weight of her words pressing down on me. "But she wrote to you," I said desperately. "I saw the letters. She cared for you. She regretted everything." Elizabeth let out a bitter laugh. "Regret doesn't erase abandonment. Regret doesn't change the fact that she left me to grow up without her. Do you know what that feels like? To wonder every single day why your own mother didn't want you." Tears pricked my eyes. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know any of this. If you had, she cut me off sharply. "What would you have done, Lily?" Stood up for me? Stopped her from choosing you over me? Don't flatter yourself. Her words pierced like arrows. I wanted to defend myself, to say that I wasn't the enemy here, that I had been just as blind, just as betrayed. But the fury in her eyes stopped me cold. I didn't choose this, I whispered. I didn't even know you existed. And I want to know you. I want to understand. You're my sister Elizabeth's face hardened even more, if that was possible. Don't call me that. The rejection stung more than I expected. Why not? I asked, my voice cracking. Because you're not my sister, she said flatly. You're Margaret's daughter. Her favorite, her chosen one. And She trailed off, her eyes darkening. I was the mistake she tried to erase. Silence engulfed us. Around us, the cafe buzzed with normal life, people laughing, typing on laptops, sipping their lattes, while my entire world fractured at that tiny wooden table. I reached out, placing my trembling hand on the edge of her table. Elizabeth, please. We don't have to let her choices divide us. We can decide what kind of family we want to be. Her eyes bore into mine, sharp and unforgiving. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something softer, hesitation, maybe even pain, but it was gone in an instant. You're too late, Lily, she said coldly, standing up and gathering her things. Whatever family we could have had, it died with her. And with that, she walked out of the cafe, leaving me staring after her, my heart in pieces, my hands shaking so badly I could barely lift my coffee cup. I had found her. But instead of gaining a sister, I felt like I had gained a stranger who wanted nothing to do with me. Yet deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Her anger, her bitterness, it was only the surface of something deeper, something darker, something my mother had never wanted me to uncover. And I wasn't going to stop until I knew the full truth. For days after that first encounter, I couldn't think about anything else. Elizabeth's words echoed in my head like a curse. Don't call me that. You're not my sister. Whatever family we could have had died with her. I replayed every second of our conversation, every flicker in her eyes, every cold edge in her voice. And yet, as much as her rejection hurt, I couldn't let it end there. Something about the way she looked at me, the bitterness mixed with pain, told me her story wasn't as simple as hatred. It was more complicated, more twisted. And deep down, I knew my mother had hidden more than she ever admitted, even in those letters. So I started digging again. I went back to the folder of documents I had found in my mother's desk, laying out the birth certificate, the photos, the receipts. I studied each one, searching for patterns, connections. The photos fascinated me most. Elizabeth as a little girl in secondhand clothes, Elizabeth as a teenager with her arms crossed, staring at the camera like it had already betrayed her. She looked proud, but also lonely. None of those photos had my mother in them. None of them had me. It was as if she had grown up in a separate universe. I wondered who had taken those pictures, who had raised her. The birth certificate was no help. It listed no father, only my mother. But in one of the letters, I noticed a name scribbled at the corner, almost like an afterthought. Thank you, Helen, for taking care of her when I couldn't. Helen. I didn't know anyone by that name. Not in my mother's circle, not in my family. It was a dead end, or at least it seemed that way, until I remembered something. My mother used to receive Christmas cards every year from a woman named Helen Morris. She never explained who she was, only that she was an old family friend. I had always assumed Helen was a childhood friend, someone from long ago. But what if she was more? I dug through old boxes until I found a stack of those Christmas cards. They were simple, always signed the same way. With love, Helen. The addresses varied slightly, but the name was always there. My hands shook as I picked up the most recent one, dated just a year ago, sent from a small town 2 hours away. Could Helen be the one who raised Elizabeth? I couldn't wait. I got into my car the next morning and drove to that town. It was small, quiet, the kind of place where everyone seemed to know each other. I found the street listed on the envelope and pulled up to a modest white house with peeling paint and a sagging porch. My heart pounded as I walked up the steps and rang the bell. An elderly woman answered, her hair white, her eyes sharp despite her age. She studied me for a long moment before speaking. "Can I help you?" "Are you Helen Morris?" I asked. She hesitated. "Who's asking?" "My name is Lily Walker." Margaret Walker was my mother. Her face changed instantly. A shadow passed over her features and she stepped aside. "Come in." The inside of her house was filled with old furniture, faded photographs, the smell of dust and cinnamon. She led me to the living room and gestured for me to sit. "I knew this day might come," she said quietly, folding her hands. "Margaret always said she wanted to tell you, but I suppose she never found the courage." "Tell me what?" I asked, my voice trembling. "That you have a sister," she said simply. My throat tightened. "Elizabeth. You raised her, didn't you?" Helen nodded. "From the time she was 3. Margaret brought her to me, said she couldn't give her the life she deserved. She was young, unmarried, and terrified of what people would say. She begged me to take Elizabeth in, at least until she could figure things out. But Margaret never came back for her. She sent money sometimes, letters too, but she never truly claimed her." Tears burned my eyes. "So Elizabeth grew up thinking my mother abandoned her?" "She didn't just think it," Helen said firmly. "She lived it. She watched your mother choose another life, choose you. That kind of wound doesn't heal easily." I buried my face in my hands, the weight of it all pressed down on me. "She hates me." "She doesn't hate you," Helen said softly. "She hates what your mother did. But she doesn't know how to separate you from Margaret's choices." I lifted my head, meeting Helen's gaze. "Can you tell me about her? About Elizabeth?" Helen sighed, leaning back in her chair. "She was always smart, fierce. She had this fire in her that made her stand out, even as a little girl. But she also carried anger, like a shadow she couldn't shake. She wanted answers Margaret never gave her. And now that Margaret's gone, I fear she's looking for them in the wrong places." "What do you mean?" I asked cautiously. Helen hesitated. "She's been talking to lawyers, asking about inheritance laws, about rights she might have as Margaret's firstborn. I don't know what she plans to do, but I can tell you this. She's not done with you, Lily. Not by a long shot." A chill ran through me. Inheritance? Rights? Of course. That explained the books on family law, the edge in Elizabeth's voice when she spoke about being the forgotten one. She wasn't just angry. She wanted something. When I left Helen's house, my mind was spinning. My mother's secret wasn't just a hidden child. It was a chain reaction of consequences that were now landing squarely in my lap. Elizabeth's anger wasn't going to fade. If anything, it was going to grow. And now for the first time I realized she might not just want answers, she might want revenge. The warning from Helen kept me awake for nights. "Elizabeth is talking to lawyers. She's not done with you." Those words echoed like a drumbeat, making my stomach twist with dread. I told myself it couldn't be true. That inheritance was straightforward, that my mother had left her will in order. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how little I actually knew. My mother had never discussed her will with me. We avoided the subject while she was alive, too afraid it would feel like giving up. When she passed, the lawyer read the basics. The house, the savings, and a few personal belongings were left to me. It seemed simple, unchallenged. But now, with Elizabeth in the picture, nothing felt safe. 2 weeks after my visit to Helen, I received a letter in the mail. The envelope was crisp, official, stamped with the name of a law firm I didn't recognize. My hands shook as I opened it. It was a notice of intent to contest the will. Elizabeth Walker was formally challenging my mother's estate. I sank into my chair, the words blurring as my eyes filled with tears. She wasn't bluffing, she was serious. That evening, I called Aunt Carol. My voice cracked as I explained what had happened. "She's taking me to court, Carol. She's actually doing it. She wants Mom's house, Mom's money, everything." Carol's sigh was heavy. I warned you, Lily. Elizabeth has carried this resentment her whole life. She doesn't just want material things. She wants recognition. She wants proof that she mattered to Margaret. But I mattered too, I cried. I was there. I took care of Mom when she was sick. I gave her everything I could. And now Elizabeth swoops in, after all these years, and wants to erase me? Carol's voice softened. She's not trying to erase you. She's trying to rewrite the story in her favor. That's not the same thing, but it can feel just as painful. The next day, I met with my own lawyer. He was calm, professional, but his words did little to comfort me. Legally, this will be difficult. If Elizabeth can prove she is a biological daughter, and that Margaret failed to acknowledge her properly, she may have a case for partial inheritance. My throat went dry. But she was given away. She wasn't part of Mom's life. Courts don't always care about that, he replied. What matters is blood and intent. If Elizabeth's lawyers are aggressive, they'll argue your mother tried to hide her, not that she abandoned her. That changes the narrative. And juries are unpredictable. That night, I sat at my mother's desk, staring at the letters again. They were filled with guilt, with longing, with apologies. If Elizabeth's lawyers got their hands on them, they would use them as ammunition, proof that my mother never stopped seeing her as a daughter. Proof that she deserved something too. And that terrified me. Because deep down, I knew they weren't wrong. Elizabeth did deserve something. She was my mother's child. She had suffered. She had been kept in the shadows while I lived in the light. But why did her justice have to come at the expense of everything I had left? Days blurred into weeks as I tried to brace myself for the storm. Elizabeth never called, never wrote. But I saw her. She showed up at the cafe again. She walked into the same bookstore. Once, I even saw her across the street from my mother's house, just standing there, staring up at the windows like she was reclaiming it in her mind. When I finally confronted her outside the house, my anger boiled over. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded, blocking her path. "Why can't you just talk to me instead of hiding behind lawyers?" Her expression was cool, her voice steady. "Because talking doesn't change the past, Lily. Talking doesn't give me back 30 years of a life I should have had. The courts will listen, even if you won't." "You'll destroy both of us," I whispered. She tilted her head, her dark eyes unflinching. "Maybe that's what it takes." Then she walked away, leaving me trembling on the front lawn, clutching the ghost of a family that was slipping further out of reach with every step she took. The lawsuit already felt like a storm gathering on the horizon, but what came next made the ground shake beneath my feet. It started with a phone call. My lawyer had been gathering information, trying to anticipate what Elizabeth's legal team might use against me. He called one afternoon, his voice unusually cautious. "Lily," he said, "we've just received additional filings from Elizabeth's attorneys. She's not fighting this alone. Someone else has joined her claim." I felt my chest tighten. "What do you mean, joined?" "She has legal representation from a man claiming to be her father." The room spun. My knees buckled and I dropped into a chair. "Her father?" I whispered. "That's impossible. Mom never told me anything about him. Her birth certificate even said unknown." "That may be," my lawyer said carefully, "but this man has submitted a statement. His name is Richard Hale. According to the documents, he says he had a relationship with your mother before you were born. He claims Elizabeth is his daughter, and that he can prove it with a DNA test." I gripped the phone so hard my hand hurt. Richard Hale. A stranger's name, and yet it suddenly felt like it had been lurking in the shadows of my life all along. When I hung up, I couldn't breathe. I went straight to the attic again, desperate for something, anything that could make sense of this. After tearing through box after box, I found a small photo album buried under a pile of yellowed blankets. The album was older than the others, its pages brittle, its photos faded, and there he was, a tall man with dark hair and a serious expression, standing beside my mother in several photographs. They weren't affectionate, not exactly, but there was an unmistakable closeness. In one photo, he had his arm slung casually over her shoulders. In another, my mother was looking at him with a softness I had rarely seen in her eyes. Richard Hale. The name rang in my mind like a bell, each strike louder than the last. Why had she erased him from Elizabeth's birth certificate? Why had she hidden him entirely? A few days later, I saw him in person. I hadn't expected it. I was leaving the lawyer's office when a man stepped onto the sidewalk, blocking my path. He was older now, his hair streaked with gray, but I recognized him instantly from the photos. "Lily," he said, his voice deep, steady. "You look just like her." My stomach churned. "Who are you?" I demanded, though I already knew. "Richard Hale," he said. "Elizabeth's father. And Margaret's secret." The words cut through me like glass. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him he had no right to step into my life now, after decades of silence. But all I could do was stare at him, my heart pounding. "What do you want?" I asked finally, my voice shaking. "I want justice for my daughter," he said calmly. "Margaret wronged her. She abandoned her, and now you're reaping all the rewards while Elizabeth gets nothing. That's not fair. She's not the only one who suffered," I snapped. "Do you think it's easy to find out your entire life was a lie? That you had a sister hidden from you? That your mother, my mother, chose lies over honesty?" His expression didn't change. He just shook his head slowly. "Elizabeth deserves her share. And if you fight us, Lily, you'll lose more than you realize." The threat was subtle, but it made my blood run cold. When he walked away, I stood frozen on the sidewalk, trembling with rage and fear. Elizabeth wasn't just fueled by anger anymore. She had an ally, her father, a man who knew my mother, who could twist the past into something ugly, who could stand in court and make Margaret's legacy look like betrayal. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just a legal battle. This was a war. I couldn't stop shaking after my encounter with Richard Hale. The way he looked at me, the certainty in his voice, the quiet threat behind his calm words. It felt like he had been waiting years for this moment. But why had my mother erased him from Elizabeth's life? Why had she hidden his name, hidden his existence entirely? The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. If I wanted answers, I couldn't rely on Elizabeth or her father to tell me the truth. They would twist it to serve their narrative. No, I had to uncover the truth myself. I began with the photo album I had found, the one showing Richard and my mother together. The photos were dated 1982, 1983, the years before I was born. They looked young, maybe in their 20s. In some shots, they stood with other people I didn't recognize, in places I didn't know. I flipped through every page, searching for details. And then I saw it. A storefront sign in the background of one photo. Hale and Sons Construction. My hands trembled. He hadn't just been some casual boyfriend. He had a business, a family name, roots. I grabbed my laptop and searched the company. To my shock, it was still active, now owned by Richard's brother. There were old newspaper articles, too, archived online. That's when the puzzle pieces started falling into place. One article from 1983 mentioned Richard Hale being investigated for financial misconduct, allegations of fraud, of shady contracts. Another hinted at violent altercations, bar fights, even accusations of assault. Nothing had ever been proven, but his name was tied to scandal after scandal. And suddenly, I understood. My mother hadn't erased him because he was irrelevant. She had erased him because he was dangerous. The realization made my skin crawl. If Richard had been violent, if he had been manipulative, then Elizabeth's anger might not just come from abandonment. It might come from the life she had to endure growing up with a man like him. I needed confirmation. So I went to Aunt Carol again. She looked older, wearier than ever when I showed up at her doorstep. She didn't even pretend to be surprised this time. "You've met him," she said flatly. "Yes," I whispered. "And he's helping Elizabeth." "He wants everything." Carol sighed heavily and sank into a chair. "Of course he does. Richard always wanted power. And your mother knew it. Tell me the truth, I begged. Why did she hide him? Why didn't she tell me, or Elizabeth, or anyone? Carol hesitated, her hands twisting in her lap. Because Richard wasn't the kind of man you could trust. He was charming at first, sure, handsome, confident. But he had a temper, a cruel streak. Your mother saw it too late, after Elizabeth was born. By then, she was already tied to him. My stomach churned. Did he hurt her? Carol's eyes flickered, and she lowered her voice. He scared her, Lily. That much I know. He threatened her, manipulated her. She tried to break away, but he wouldn't let her go. When Elizabeth was 3, Margaret made the hardest decision of her life. She took Elizabeth to Helen, begged her to raise her, and cut ties with Richard completely. She was terrified he'd drag them both down with him. Tears blurred my vision. My mother hadn't just abandoned Elizabeth. She had been trying to protect her. But Elizabeth doesn't know that, I whispered. Carol shook her head sadly, and Richard will never let her believe it. He's poisoned her for years, Lily. Fed her anger, her resentment. That's why she hates Margaret, and by extension, you. You're the symbol of everything she thinks she was denied. The truth weighed heavily on me. Elizabeth wasn't just angry because of my mother's secrecy. She was angry because Richard had shaped her entire view of the past, and now he was using her as a weapon against me. When I left Carol's house, the air felt colder, the shadows darker. For the first time, I realized this fight wasn't really between me and Elizabeth. It was between me and Richard Hale. And he wasn't just after money. He wanted to rewrite history, to paint my mother as a coward, himself as the victim, and Elizabeth as the rightful heir. The thought made me shiver, because if he succeeded, I wouldn't just lose the inheritance. I would lose my mother's memory, her legacy, everything she had fought to protect. And I couldn't let that happen. The day finally came when I couldn't avoid Elizabeth anymore. The legal storm that had been brewing finally cracked open, and the first hearing was scheduled. I arrived at the courthouse early, my stomach in knots, my hands clammy. Every step up those cold marble stairs felt like a march toward a battlefield. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy, almost suffocating. Lawyers whispered, papers shuffled, and the judge's bench loomed like a silent wall of judgment. And then she walked in. Elizabeth. My sister, my rival, my stranger. She looked flawless, confident, dressed in a tailored navy suit that made her appear older, stronger, untouchable. Richard Hale was at her side, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. When our eyes met, Elizabeth's expression didn't soften. If anything, her lips curved into a faint, satisfied smile, as though she had already won. I tried to steady my breath, but the weight of her gaze pressed down on me like stone. The lawyers began their opening arguments. Elizabeth's team painted a picture of abandonment, of a daughter left to grow up without her mother, while another child lived in privilege. They waved the letters as evidence, each one dripping with my mother's guilt. They argued that Margaret Walker had tried to make amends, but that the will was incomplete, unjust, because it excluded Elizabeth entirely. I sat frozen, every word slicing me open. When it was my lawyer's turn, he argued that my mother's will was clear and legal, that Elizabeth had been cared for by another guardian, that my mother had done what she thought was best, given impossible circumstances. But even as he spoke, I saw the doubt flicker across the judge's face. And then Elizabeth herself took the stand. She carried herself with poise, but her voice trembled with carefully rehearsed emotion. Do you know what it's like to grow up knowing your mother gave you away? To see her from a distance, always choosing someone else, always pretending you didn't exist? I lived in the shadows, while Lily lived in the light. I was erased from my own family. Her words hit the room like thunder. I wanted to scream, to shout that it wasn't true, that my mother hadn't abandoned her, but had tried to protect her. But the judge silenced me with a glance, and all I could do was sit there, helpless, while Elizabeth spun a story built on Richard's poison. When my turn came to testify, I walked slowly to the stand, my knees weak. I told the truth as I knew it, that I had discovered the letters only after my mother's death, that I hadn't known Elizabeth existed until then. My voice broke as I described the pain of betrayal, the loneliness of realizing my mother had lived a double life. But I also spoke of love, of how my mother cared for me, how she held our family together in her own broken way. And I spoke of Elizabeth, not as an enemy, but as a sister I wanted to know, a sister I wanted to love, if only she would let me. When I said those words, Elizabeth's eyes flickered, just for a second. I saw something there, hesitation, doubt, maybe even longing. But then Richard placed a hand on her shoulder, and her face hardened again, her mask snapping back into place. The hearing adjourned, but the war had only begun. As we left the courtroom, Elizabeth stopped me in the hallway. Her eyes burned into mine, filled with fury and something deeper, something like pain. "You can cry about love all you want," she said coldly, "but love doesn't pay for 30 years of silence." "Justice will justice?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "Or revenge?" She didn't answer. She just turned and walked away, Richard at her side like a shadow. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about rewriting the past. About erasing me the way she thought my mother had erased her. And I wasn't sure I had the strength to stop her. After the hearing, I couldn't breathe, couldn't. The walls of the courthouse seemed to close in on me, my chest tight, my head spinning. I wanted to run, to hide, to disappear, but I knew there was no escape. Elizabeth wasn't going to stop, Richard wasn't going to stop, and the past wasn't done with me yet. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my mother's old study, surrounded by her things, desperate for guidance from a woman who could no longer speak. My fingers traced over the spines of her books, the worn wood of her desk, the framed photos on the shelves. For the 100th time I asked myself, why did she lie? Why did she keep Elizabeth in the shadows? And then, as if fate had guided me, I found it. A sealed envelope taped to the underside of a drawer. My heart skipped as I pulled it free. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. "For Lily, when the time is right." With trembling hands, I tore it open. Inside was a letter, my mother's last words to me. "My darling Lily, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have discovered the truth I could never bring myself to tell you in life. You have a sister. Her name is Elizabeth. She is my first child, and my greatest regret is that I could not raise you both together. But you must understand why I did what I did. When Elizabeth was born, I was alone and frightened. Her father, Richard, was not the man I thought he was. He was cruel, manipulative, and dangerous. He hurt me, Lily. He scared me in ways I cannot even put into words. I knew I could not raise a child with him, not without putting her life and mine at risk. So I gave her to Helen, who loved her, who could protect her when I could not. I watched from a distance. I wrote letters. I sent what little I could. But Richard poisoned her heart against me, and I was too much of a coward to fight him. By the time I had you, I wanted nothing more than to shield you from that darkness. I thought I was protecting you both, but in truth, I only created more pain. Please, Lily, do not hate your sister. She is not your enemy. She is wounded, just as I was. If she fights you now, it is only because she has been taught to hate me, and through me, to hate you. But if you can find it in your heart to forgive, to reach her, then perhaps something good can still come from my mistakes. Love always, Mom." I clutched the letter to my chest, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. The truth was clearer now than ever. My mother hadn't abandoned Elizabeth out of shame. She had been running from Richard, from his cruelty, from the danger he posed, and in her desperation, she had made a choice that tore our family apart. The next day I met Elizabeth again. Not in a courtroom, but at the cafe where it all began. She was already there, sitting in her corner seat, her black coffee untouched. When she saw me, her expression was cold, guarded, but she didn't walk away. I sat down across from her and slid the envelope across the table. "This is from Mom," I whispered. "Her last letter." "Read it." Elizabeth hesitated, suspicion flashing in her eyes, but she took it. As her eyes moved across the page, I saw her facade crack. Her lips trembled. Her hand shook. For the first time, she looked less like an enemy and more like the sister I had imagined. When she finished, she set the letter down slowly, her eyes glistening. She said he hurt her?" "Yes," I said softly. "That's why she left you with Helen. Not because she didn't love you, but because she was trying to save you." Elizabeth's face twisted, torn between fury and grief. "All my life, Richard told me she abandoned me because I wasn't good enough. He made me believe she chose you over me. He lied to you," I said firmly. "He wanted you angry because anger kept you on his side." "But Mom loved you, Elizabeth. She always did." For a long moment, silence stretched between us. I held my breath, afraid she would lash out again, afraid she would reject the truth the way she had rejected me. But then, slowly, she whispered, "I don't know if I can forgive her. Or you. Not yet." Tears slipped down my cheeks. "You don't have to. Just don't let Richard decide who you are anymore. Don't let him poison you the way he poisoned Mom." Her eyes softened just slightly. For the first time, I saw not hatred, but pain. The kind of pain that could, maybe one day, turn into healing. When she stood to leave, she didn't slam the letter down or throw it away. She folded it carefully, slipped it into her coat, and walked out without another word. I didn't know what would happen next. Maybe we'd still end up in court. Maybe she'd keep fighting, or maybe, just maybe, that letter had planted a seed that could grow into something new. As I sat alone in the cafe, staring at the empty chair across from me, I realized that this wasn't the end of our story. It was only the beginning.